Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians at the DNA company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is in your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by your personal doctor, therapist, and other healthcare professionals.
Our focus tonight, stress. Have you guys gone a day with stress? Maybe without stress? That's impossible. Stress is not all bad. We'll talk about that momentarily. Here at the DNA Company, we aim to revolutionize medicine with affordable precision DNA testing and clinical consultation that helps you, your family, your loved ones, and anyone you have in mind that you would hope to lead a better and healthier life, people at large, understand their genetic blueprint, something we like to call the instruction manual for improved health and longevity. As I mentioned, folks, as you probably already know, this is our Man Up series. And here's another man of the hour, Justin Harris. Justin, we are talking about stress. How was your day today? Stressful?
Stressful, and I love it because the more stressful it is, the more I grow on the other side of it. So
Bingo.
yes, it was stressful. Yes, I have dealt with it properly, and I'm now stronger because of it. How was your day?
My day was that elevated stress level, but once again, to your point, no such thing as a stress-free day. And when you learn and manage it appropriately, I like to think there's no coping, or we shouldn't cope with stress. What we should do is manage it, expect it, anticipate it, and manage it. And folks, as a co-founder of the company and a clinician of 25 years, I can tell you that part of my arsenal, part of my bag of tricks in a clinical sense, if you will, is dosing out this information, both from the books, in the literature, as well as my own personal experience with stress over the years. And when I'm effective at doing that for individuals, it can be incredibly empowering. Justin, I know you do the same with your genetic coaching as well.
Yeah, you have to because in my practice, right? It's like the first thing that I do is I give you a master plan, right? That's why we separate the programs from audits and then transition towards the coaching. And so I give you a master plan, but then the next critical step is that we have to master the plan, right? At a certain point, we don't have to have a master plan. We have to master the plan. So, stress management, in my opinion, the better you are at managing stress and the higher that threshold is, it's going to have a direct correlation to your
Right.
ability to succeed in life, deal with the variables that are going to get chucked at you, which
You
they do.
know, and I love that you're underscoring that mastering the plan. There's really the three P's with what we both do. There's the prevention when we talk about genetics, understanding your DNA, backpinning, underbone, and we'll talk about that obviously as it pertains to stress. So the prevention is absolutely key. The personalization is of utmost importance, and that's the genomics. But participatory, that's the P that's often missing. You can give all kinds of information, but the individual who's on board with wanting to learn how to be a better them using the instruction manual that obviously we provide, that's the participatory element that a lot of people this is not about hand holding. This is about the instruction. Here's what you would probably be best to do as an individual with your genetics as an instruction manual to guide you. And then we as clinicians can only take you so far with that information. I mean, is that something that's, by the way, stressful to you in a clinical practice when somebody you feel like they're convinced and they're onboarded with what we do, and then you have a follow-up and they've done very little to none of it?
Well, I mean, a great coach doesn't tell you what to see, he tells you where to look.
Love it.
So I feel like as long as I provided the pathway, sooner or later the onus ends up being on them, but they know that they're going to have to talk to me in a week, and they know exactly what I'm going to say if they haven't implemented anything. So I show them where to look, I give them the master plan, and then it's just a matter of daily stacking those wins and kind of getting closer and closer to their 2.0, 10.0, let's call it. Once they start to feel better, I don't have to even instruct them anymore. They kind of equate it with their dopamine pathway, which we'll likely talk about a bit today. They equate success and those good feelings that you get from it. So now you feel good when you do these things. And it doesn't
Yeah.
take a lot of discipline to do something that feels good. you know?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. So, we like to kick these sessions off, these webinars, with what's trending before we get into the weeds about what we feel stress is. And folks, we have agreed not to go down that biochemical pathway. We're not taking you back to 12th grade biology and the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. You've heard it before. And if you haven't, ask questions about it. But we're going to take a very interesting and different slant on stress and the whole idea of men to man up. And before we do, latest discovery in men's health in general. What's been on your radar, Justin, since the last we've done this?
So I am always looking for just different things to give you an edge. That's that athlete in my brain. I can't really shut that guy off. So I look at kind of natural ways to kind of boost performance, be it athletic or cognitive performance. Lately, my obsession and what I've been really interested in is this thing called turkesterone. It may be pronounced turkesterone. I'm not actually sure. I call it turkesterone, but it's actually a plant compound that has muscle building and strength performance that are on par with some, low level anabolics, let's call it. But it's very fascinating because it's actually not binding to the androgen receptor, right? So you don't get those androgenized kind of side effects. It's not going to mess with your hair, mess with your skin. It's not going to shut everything down, but it is on par, acting actually via the estrogen receptor, the estrogen beta receptor, to influence muscle mass and strength and performance and things like that. So I'm strongly considering giving it a try, but the research is phenomenal and insane. And I've really been curious on that one lately, I suppose.
I love it. And I bet you that's got a lot of head scratching. I'm going to say energy. My radar's always around energy and the latest around energy. And if you're a fan of Dr. Charles Brenner and you're listening to what he has to recommend around nicotinamide riboside, or perhaps Dr. David Sinclair around NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, the whole idea is the race to downstream NAD. Which is ultimately going to help precursor ATP, which is the currency of energy in our body. And actually, it somewhat relates to today's topic, stress. Stress zaps you of energy, and then you're looking for more, and you typically go to the, false energy gods of the world, caffeine and stimulants. But here's what's piqued, if you will, excuse the pun, you'll know why in a second, my attention. There is a TSI, that's the group manufacturer of an ingredient you can find in so many different, now just recently available over-the-counter supplements, called Peak ATP. So before now, you showed me a product with ATP in it, and I'd be like, you don't absorb ATP by supplementing with ATP. That's impossible. NAD, same kind of story. NMN, yes. NR, yes. But ATP, no. There's a disodium ATP, and the research is very compelling, if not maybe convincing, that by supplementing with this disodium ATP called peak ATP, so that's what you look on your label for, you're going to ramp up immediately a non-stimulating direct energy source. So that's been on my radar. I'm following that research and that science pretty closely, because who couldn't use more energy, particularly at the end of the day, if you're stressed, and stress has sort of zapped that from you. So that's our topic of today. I like this idea that stress is triggered, if you will, by a requirement of the body, or even the mind for that matter, to adjust, to adapt, to respond to changing circumstances or pressures. That's kind of the definition I like. But reaching one's threshold, because we all have a different one, right? Like some people have, it's like the boiling point of water at sea level, 100 degrees. For some people, though, their boiling point is 110. For others, it's 70. And that's where genes play a role. So is your boiling point 70, 80, 90? Is it 100? Is it 120? How do you manage stress? And then at the end of the day, I really feel it may, in fact, be North America's #1 silent killer. Stress contributes to diabetes, heart disease, and even cancer. Is there a definition that you like or that you go by, or when somebody says I'm stressed out, you say kind of, what do you mean? And then further define it in the world of Justin.
So in the world of Justin, which is quite the world, I would say that I'm of the opinion that life has contraction phases and expansion phases. Like we have these testing seasons in our life, and in my experience, the universe, whatever you want to call it, tends to send us tests in order to trigger our leveling up in the corresponding areas. right? So like I'll give an example. So I'm a stepdad, to a kid with special needs. And prior to being in this situation, I must admit I had a serious patience problem. I had no patience for anything. And the universe said, okay, Justin, you need to level up in this area. So it gave me that daily stress, that daily reason to have to kind of, take a step back, take a breath, and learn how to be a more patient person, a more calm person, that kind of a thing. So stress, I choose to put a positive connotation surrounding it. I think that it's something that's there to create a better version of us on the other side of it. Because what do we do when we pass a test? Well, we create something better, a 2.0 version of what we would have been. So my definition of stress is only positive. I choose to give it that power. I think people and clients of mine, when they come to me and they say, I'm very stressed, I say, great, right? I say, good. This is going to be amazing. Best case scenario, because you're in a testing season. So you have to win in your losing season in order to kind of learn more about yourself. So most people, when they get into a losing season, like a lot of things going bad, they choose to compound the problem by losing further. I'm stressed, so I'm going to have snacks. I'm stressed, so I'm going to have a drink. I'm stressed, so that's why I lost my temper on that person. You got to win in your losing season. When things are going wrong, it's only wrong by definition. This is an interpretation. If it's going wrong, you have to double down on what builds you, right? Stop running to the things that consistently break you down and run to what builds you instead. That gives you all the power you can possibly have. So stress is positive if you take it that way. It's negative if you take it that way.
So
That's
let me
kind
play
of in my
devil's
mind.
advocate. Because, and as we can appreciate, there's a lot of folks out there that have a genetic predisposition to certain neurochemistry, and certainly through environmental experience, that it's hard to get out of that negative reinforced, sort of snowball scenario. So I agree that not all stress is bad. And I agree that it's an opportunity to grow. But balance is key. And that's really the message of today. If you find that you're imbalanced and overly stressed, we've got some solutions for you. And it starts with understanding your genomics first. Off mic, off camera, we've talked a lot about, and even on camera, hormesis. This is something helpful actually to understand this idea of balance and not all stress is bad. A perfect example, in fact, that you and I are both very much into is exercise, weight bearing in particular. That's hormetic because it's very physically stressful. We'll talk about different types of stress in a second too, but hormetic stress is that amount of stress that at the end of the day is just enough to provide health benefit, but does not kill you. Too little of which will do nothing, too much of which may be harmful, chronically might kill you. What's your take on hormesis? How do you intervene using that concept with your consultations?
Yeah, so the Chinese made the yin and the yang, what, 5,000 years ago. We've always known that there's this concept of hormesis and the body's desire and also innate ability to create balance within itself. So the introduction of self-imposed adversity, let's say via something like exercise, it triggers in you positive stressors that have certain adaptations that actually create you stronger on the other side of it, right? So when we lift weights, it's very stressful. And when we fast, that's another hormetic stressor. Cold is a hormetic stressor. Heat is a hormetic stressor. There's this point where we can press our body with these different stressors to actually get some additional functionality out of it. But too much fasting is going to start to kind of spill over and do some damage. Too much exercise is going to start to spill over, do some damage. Too much cold, right? Your cortisol will go up eventually. So it's really just finding that balance point. And it's like when people ask me about overtraining. Can you overtrain? Can't you overtrain? To me, it's really about that homeostatic component, because I may be able to lift weights 7 days a week and not enter into that overtraining mode. I may lift 3 days a week and be overtrained. The difference maker is how much parasympathetic activity, right? Like healing and building activity, am I able to uh, create in my body via these different mechanisms and foam rolling and breathing and different things. So hormesis is really just like we need to break ourselves down in these ways, and then we need to recover in these other ways. finding that middle ground so that our chemistry is actually balanced is where the definition would come in my opinion.
Right. And hormesis is a bell curve, folks. And at the end of the day, this sort of left side of the bell curve is where maybe there's too little of a stressor. That Goldilocks perfect in the middle is what you're seeking. And then too far to the right is damage, disease. And here's what I want to underscore. Everyone, by virtue of genetic predisposition, particularly what we're going to get into momentarily, executive function, that neurochemistry that Justin was alluding to just now, that hormetic perfect Goldilocks zone will shift to the right or to the left, depending on those genes. This is our angle today, at least in part. You're going to want to stay tuned and ask some questions that you may have on this topic or anything related to men and stress, the focus being man up. So different types of stress. Psychological, that's what we're most familiar with. Mental, emotional, rather. Largely, workplace, social, spiritual, existential. Some acute, some chronic, some acute chronic, but also physical. We talked about it. Good and bad. Too little, too much exercise. There's the Goldilocks in the middle, and then there's chemical. And actually, without realizing it, I know you were alluding to it earlier, but we call it eustress. EU stress. Eustress is good stress. Stress that can make us happy. That's the fun and exciting type of stress. In fact, that's where we lack and we're deficient in North America. I want to talk about men because that's the topic of the show, and we are guys, and men respond differently to stress than women, and that's okay. We have a biological difference, an emotional processing and expression difference. We have a coping, or hopefully we can, this vernacular can change by the end of this hour, managing strategy different than women. Let's talk about the biological response. I mean, you mentioned cortisol, not going to down in the weeds there, but how are men different than women from a biological perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we're so different in so many ways, and we're also quite similar in others. We're similar in that we all have the noradrenaline pathway. We all have a serotonin pathway. We all make hormones, different things. But what I would say is that with men, there's this relationship between testosterone and cortisol that I think is a little bit more pronounced. I think that the higher your cortisol is, which in and of itself, cortisol is not this evil thing. It's necessary for circadian rhythm and different things. But, it's chronically elevated in so many of us, and it actually can have a direct lowering of testosterone, growth hormone, things that make us feel good. Like testosterone has an antidepressant effect. It's got a motivation component, just like a dopamine does. So when males are stressed, I believe that there is that hormonal impact that makes it so that we're not as strong, we're not as confident. I think it messes with us in a lot of ways. And in my experience, the more stress that gets kind of thrown at us, right, in different ways, it seems to manifest as rage, right? That's what seems to kind of come out with us. Have you experienced the same thing?
Yeah, I was just going to say men are definitely more that rage predisposed evolutionarily. That's the biology, more fight or flight.
Yeah.
Whereas perhaps women, it's in the literature, are known to be a little more tend and befriend. And that's oxytocin. So versus, as you described, the testosterone. And it's not so black and white. There are variations of men and variations of women. We're going to get into that, as I mentioned, executive function, the neurochemistry behind each, but certainly as it relates to the biological response, bang on. Testosterone's what drives us. Estrogen's what drives women. And it's not that simple. And that's why we do a wonderful hormonal panel, by the way, at the DNA company, obviously, as well. And then when it comes to emotional processing and expression, agree or disagree, men are basically, generally speaking, and again, we have to be generalized, and we're talking about a topic like this, less expressive. We internalize. Women are simply more verbal, often more intelligent about it. They seek social connections to solve the issue. We put stuff inside. Again, agree or disagree.
100%. I've experienced that just with myself, that internalization of things. And who knows how much of that is cultural, right, and societal, and how we kind of have this thing where we're supposed to just have it covered. So we don't really express it in the same way. People kind of simplify and say that, women are more emotional and men not so much. I think in some ways men are actually more emotional than women. I don't think that we express it as intelligently as you said. The emotional intelligence I think we tend to store it. But I mean, if you look at, for example, after a bad breakup, more men kill themselves after a breakup than women, and I think that it's that capacity to not have open dialogue, even stuff like this, not being able to really share, feeling like you can't. So it goes inside, and that's all stress, and that can tax your heart, that can tax all kinds of stuff from a medical perspective. But yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. I'm in agreement on that one for sure.
Yeah, and we don't disagree very often, but I will have a differing opinion here. And I would suggest, as it relates to coping or strategies around managing stress, that men, I think, tend to be a little more problem focused, and women are a lot more emotional focused. I think that's simply the main difference between men and women. I might get some heat for saying that. I think it's actually supported in the literature. Neither is the right necessarily. We're talking about this being something that's very unique, and yet we're generalizing. So let's go back to what really is unique. How at the DNA company we're looking at unique genomic differences to really understand, and one, how I'm different than you, Justin, how we're different than the average Joe. That's what we're talking about. And the executive function and even the hormone pathways are very much starting points to understand stress. What is the underpinning, and where are we more predisposed as unique individuals to that stress? One. Two, what is our plan of action as it pertains to a unique individual personalized plan of attack or protocol to pertain to that stress, and get that hormesis perfected? What do we do? So let's go down into not the, we've heard a million times cortisol and, HPA and adrenal system and stress. We've heard this before. Where we're unique at the DNA company as we look at a few of these genes. ADRA2B. We'll talk about this in detail, but this is the gene essentially in charge of adrenaline, COMT or COMT, the speed at which we actually uncouple and metabolize dopamine and other catecholamines, the DRD2 gene responsible for dopamine, Mayo, 5-HTTLPR, both of which are responsible for metabolizing and recirculating or recycling, if you will, serotonin, and BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is where I want to kind of focus our attention for a little bit, and how we each express those differences and have variations within those genes really dictates at the end of the day how we manage stress. Talk to us a little bit more in detail about the ADRA2B gene, because I know that's one of the first genes you look at in the executive profile that you can tell right away with your clients, this is their predisposition to stress and how I'm going to maybe approach this individual as it pertains to stress in their life.
Yeah, I'll share something funny about that, because that's actually the first gene I look at across the board for everybody, no matter what, because I have to know how to present information to this individual. And, I'll get into the weeds a bit here, but let's say they have a double deletion for ADRA2B. Yours truly actually has a double deletion there. And so you have to be aware that the level of bluntness you may be able to use with this person can be a little bit reduced, because yeah, it's exactly what you said. The ADRA2B gene is associated with the noradrenaline receptor. When we have deletions there, it actually makes it so that there's this tendency to kind of make a mountain out of a molehill.
Right.
Like we suffer so much more in imagination than we do in reality, especially people that have deletions. I'm guilty, man, of that one. I will blow up an event and make it the most catastrophic thing of all time. And I came to learn through the testing that we do that it is in fact a genetic component. Really, there's two movers to how that kind of mechanism works, right? So the first one is COMT, that's COMT. And in this circumstance, COMT is what methylates that neurochemical. So when I say methylates, I just mean it makes it available. And then COMT also clears it, right? So it's like a reset button. And if you have a shorter version of COMT, it means that noradrenaline is actually going to clear quick, right? So when you feel the anxiety or the trauma from that, it's going to at least go away in a timely manner, right? Which can definitely influence your experience of whatever that event was.
Yep.
If you have it in the middle, like the medium COMT, yeah, it's going to clear. You're going to feel it for a bit though, If you have the AA version of COMT, that long COMT, it's like you can't hit the reset button. Right. So when something comes up that you've interpreted as trauma or stress, let's call it for today's purposes, you can't quite get over it. You know what I
Right.
mean? It kind of sticks around for too long.
Right.
So once it's been methylated and made available by COMT, the receptor site itself is that ADRA2B. And we measure that as what's called a deletion or an indel or insert, right? So it'll either be I's, which means you have a copy or two, or D's, which is a deletion. So if there's a D, or heaven forbid, two D's, that's going to represent a far more intense stimulus, a far more intense feeling when that kind of traumatic event happens.
Right.
So you can imagine the differences there. If you have the more intense version of that and a longer COMT, it's really intense and it sticks around for far too long.
Right.
This individual is not going to be an ambulance attendant. You know what I mean?
Well, I love that analogy. And there are certain jobs that are more, conducive to certain genetic types. It'd be, imagine a world in which we were able to invoke this type of testing for, high school students before they went and chose the, endeavors or jobs, that they ultimately got into for the rest of their lives. So just to recap, the deletion, the D that you described yourself expressed with ADRA2B, the adrenaline gene, if you will, related to stress. The deletion variant of this gene is basically associated with an enhanced emotional memory that can affect stress responses, potentially even impact, these neurohormones beyond adrenaline into cortisol and all these different things. And then the COMT gene encodes for the enzyme that basically breaks down catecholamines like epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline. And then variations in that gene basically affect the enzyme's level, influencing mood, stress, resilience, everything we're talking about. So that's only two genes deep, folks. We're going to get into DRD2. That's a gene that encodes for dopamine. And that dopamine receptor, D2, is involved in the reward pathway. Believe it or not, reward and the sensation of pleasure plays a role in stress. And that's been linked to addiction, other issues. But variations in this gene influence all kinds of decision-making processes. And if you go down the wrong pathway, that ultimately may have the physical or toxic stress burden to your body. So once again, this is not just all psychological, emotional. So DRD2 plays a role in that. And then, and tell us about the combination around the TPH2 gene, 5-HTTL-PR, all that stuff as it relates to serotonin that we often misconstrue as simply a happy hormone. This is also related to stress.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it plays a big role in mood regulation. So TPH2, it plays a role in the degradation and the breakdown of serotonin. And, we measure serotonin on the 5-HTTL-PR gene because it kind of acts like a revolving door, right? There's this release and then there's a reuptake. That's why people use SSRIs, right? It's a reuptake inhibitor. So in theory, it would prolong the half-life of that serotonin. So when we have a shortened receptor in the first place, meaning there's an S somewhere in your genotype, SS or LS, it means that we're probably going to have a lot less bioavailable serotonin in the first place. And serotonin is there to kind of help your brain to prioritize stimulus. So when we are dysregulated, right, we have a little bit more attention to detail, which can have its upsides, but you're also going to have that irritability factor with people, right? Because you're noticing little things and that clock is ticking on the wall and buddy over there has been chewing the same gum for so long, it must not have flavor left. And your brain will just go all over the place. The way I describe it is that there's that term seeing the forest from the trees, right? Yeah. When you have dysregulation in serotonin, you're so zoomed in that you can't really see the beauty of it all. So it's like you're looking at one insect on one tree and you're like, that's ugly, right? Meanwhile, if you could actually cultivate the ability to zoom out a little bit, you would go, the forest is beautiful. I love the forest. Serotonin, you can't really zoom out so easily when you have dysregulation. When you're completely regulated, you can zoom out, but you may be missing some of the beneficial effects of having attention to detail in the first place.
Right.
So I always speak of it in paradoxes, and there's good and bad to all these genotypes for the most part. But that's serotonin. So if you interpret everything as stress, yeah, of course, you've increased that cumulative stress load psychologically. So I think it's an effect that we have to couple with all the other stress factors in your life. Physical
Yep.
stress, like you mentioned, there's so many types.
And once again, let's come full circle. There is no perfect combination. There's simply what you have. But so far, what we've got is genes that control adrenaline, genes that control dopamine, genes that control serotonin and its reuptake. We also have a gene that we call MAO or MAO. Not the stuff that you put on a tuna sandwich, but monoamine oxidase. This is an enzyme that's actually responsible for the breakdown of other neurotransmitters besides serotonin, but inclusive of norepinephrine and dopamine. And these variants in that MAO gene, all kinds of effects, but mood in particular, and of course, stress response. And then lastly, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is essentially, the gene in charge of fertilizer to soil, if the soil is your brain, and we're talking about neurons, allowing these new neural connections or disconnections. So when we have stress, acute, you can manage that. If BDNF is low or lower than it ideally should be in the optimal variant, there may be problems as it pertains to forgetting those situations. Very similarly, as we spoke about momentarily, the ADRA2B. So all of these genes together, it's also, by the way, in charge of neuroplasticity, BDNF, and again, that connection and disconnection. So what we're getting at here is there's a number of genes relevant to mood and behavior that play a role and cross-connect as it pertains to how you, as an individual, manage stress. And what we thought today is what we'd do is we would describe three generalizations. Art, you might resonate with one of these generalizations, but three hypothetical guys. The first guy is John. We're just going to call him John. And John has this executive function that we call the Intrepid risk taker. So that COMT gene, the catechol-amino-methyltransferase, that's basically either a worrier or a warrior, we affectionately refer to. The GG variant that John has, he's a warrior. He's got a very low DRD2, so he's an AA. That makes him a thrill seeker. So this particular presentation, he's a warrior, a thrill seeker, and lastly, his MAO is a GG variant. A GG variant meaning that it's quick to, fast to break down serotonin. Not a lot of these feel-good neurochemicals are remaining. And so this individual, the stress mechanism, at least behind this, he's got a quite a low dopamine reserve. He's always seeking for that next dopamine hit. He's always looking for the next reward. His predisposition is toxicity, physical, oxidative stress. This is, not necessarily mental, emotional stress, but physical. I thought I'd start there because it's a misnomer that stress is simply a mental, emotional thing. So this risk taker, they may get involved in alcohol or substance abuse. They may face, a higher risk to death just from engaging in specific, habits. So at the end of the day, let's start with John and how we might approach John. Again, fast COMT, low DRD2, fast MAO. What are you going to recommend somebody with these physical, particularly stress implications?
Yeah. So, I mean, the real issue here is that he doesn't have this capacity to actually feel much of a dopaminergic response in the first place. You know what I mean? So it's not very intense, and we can certainly see why that would lead to addictive behaviors, maybe even depression, if I can throw the D word out there. So on the physical side of things, I mean, of course, you have to be able to deal with all the extra oxidative stress, right? The reactive oxygen species. So I might recommend an infrared sauna, something to kind of sweat out the additional toxins. I might recommend hydrogen water. I might recommend peptides like carbon 60, things to deal with the actual physical side of that. On the mental side, what I recommend he does is make sure that he gets his dopamine from something that's actually serving him as opposed to something that might break him down.
Yeah.
People consistently look for happiness in the same place that they lose it when it comes to vices, right? Substances and things. So the dopamine pathway, what we need to remember is that it's an ancient mechanism and it's actually there for our survival. our ancestors had to be motivated to do different things, and they didn't exactly have the stimulus present that we do today. So that's where in my coaching, I always bring it back to that thing that I call stacking W's, right? Stacking wins. You've got to integrate your dopamine pathway to the accomplishment of positive tasks, right? Kashyap has talked about this, that entrepreneur thing, when you have kind of a low binding DRD2, that you can use it in different ways to benefit you. So I use it by writing a long list daily of things that I want to accomplish and physically scratching it off moment by moment when I accomplish those things to kind of close the loop, close the circuit. So use it to your advantage and then take care of the physical kind of downstream things by helping your body to detox properly from that downside, if that kind of makes sense.
I love it. My mind goes toward precursors to dopamine as well. Again, this person's probably not stressed in the standard psycho-emotional stress that we typically resonate with, at least probably less than the average person. But again, the focus is that, very oxidative stress. But starting with trying to help replenish his dopamine, I go to the L-tyrosine amino acid, which is the direct precursor to dopamine. So starting with diet, I'm going to get him into a dopamine diet, replenishing and or helping to increase stores of dopamine, widely available. You can just Google this, the dopamine diet, but ultimately a lot of lean meats, some game, chicken, turkey, a lot of greens, nuts, seeds, things that are high in tyrosine, the amino acid, the precursor. One of my favorites, Justin, HRV. This is one of the wearables. There's so many of these versions. This little guy clips on your ear. Most of smartphones these days have apps, even free apps. You can do HRV analysis, but heart rate variability is, of course, the study of the beat to beat variation in the heart. And there's direct correlation from the way the heart is beating to how the brain is feeling. And of course, we can manage, stress, not just the stress this John experiences perhaps, or that overload desire to go and seek out his next hit. But heart rate variability and lessons to manage heart rate variability, whether you're using wearable technology to look at your beat to beat rhythm so as to optimize it, because that's the end game. When your heart is in optimal coherence, we call it, and it's sending, by the way, more signals from your heart to your brain than reverse, from your brain to your heart. So your heart literally speaks to your brain. When it's in this optimal heart rate variability, this sequence, it basically instructs your brain, listen, you're cool, everything's going to be okay, but hey, chill out. Take a chill pill, John, relax. You don't need to get up and go parachuting or skydiving or, get that next dopamine hit. You're fine where you are in the moment. So I love heart rate variability for that. I love heart rate variability for John. I'd be teaching him, this high stress adventurer, how to move. You said this earlier, from this chronic sympathetic dominant. His goal is to shift into parasympathetic, because that drive, that emote to constantly go and seek that next dopamine source. He's just got to learn being in the moment is excellent, and the feeling he may get eventually from that when he optimizes heart rate variability probably would grow on him. That's how I'd approach him. But I think the combination of these things and so many other things, obviously, that are well within the scope of our reports. Once you get a report from the DNA company and you open that and you determine what version of executive function, mood, behavior, and hormones you are in it, we're very actionable. We tell you exactly what you should be doing, including some of these things we just mentioned. Michael, let's talk about Michael. He's classic anxiety, right? So this is our second sort of archetype, if you were. This guy's got, that high stress response from an emotional and neurochemical perspective, so mental, emotional. So he's the opposite, a slow COMT, COMT. So COMT, again, is the speed at which you are degenerating or breaking down your catecholamines, including noradrenaline, epinephrine, and dopamine. So he's a worrier as opposed to John, the warrior, right? So Michael's already a worrier. Then he's got the decreased serotonin, the 5-HTTLPR, decreased double S. So incredibly sensitive. deer in headlights is how I like to think about this guy. And then fast Mayo. So that GG, so quick breakdown of serotonin. So holy crow, there's no serotonin left. He's a classic, right? Classic anxiety. Stress mechanism here is serotonergic deficiency or depletion. What are we doing?
Yeah, and beyond that, what I would suggest is he, let's say I had his reports, I would also be looking at his gut health genetics on top of that. Because if he has, let's say, suboptimal glutathione at the level of the gut, we can operate under the assumption that serotonin might be that much further compromised.
All right.
So yeah, I mean, this dude, let's say John and Michael both got into a little fender bender, right? He took the wrong left and they smacked into each other. The event is the exact same thing. However, that interpretation of the event is totally different, right? Like there's a thing called an EMI, an emotional memory imprint. Michael is going to remember this in such a way that it's like your brain is going to take a snapshot of it and it's going to be way more dramatic than he actually may have experienced in the moment. Your brain can kind of play tricks on you in regard to this. So, I would say mindfulness practices would be definitely really high on my list for that. My clients will tell you I never shut up about breath work. I think it's underutilized. It's free. It's quick. It also helps with the BDNF profile, which we'll be speaking about a bit. But something to kind of just down regulate that immediate nervous system response. There's a space between stimulus and response, and mastering that space is how these individuals can actually get out of it. I recommend you do weightlifting. I recommend you hit the punching bag. I recommend you do yoga. I'm about the body. You know what I mean? So you've got to get out of your head and get into your body. Like I mentioned, I'm a double deletion, for ADRA 2B. So this is a daily thing that I got to combat in my own right.
Once you know, because by the way, as we're wearing our heart on our sleeve here, and you mentioned you're a double D, ADRA 2B, I'm a double S, 5-HT-TLPR. And it's so true. Once you know and you manage it, and this is the whole point, you are cruising through life, not just way less stress. You just take a step back, get out of your own head, self-analyze, and move forward a lot more streamlined. And I love this idea of putting these two in a car accident. And Michael's maybe never going to get over it and have that deer in headlights and image and picture, whereas John, how many times a day, let alone a week, maybe month, does he purposely, crash his something or other, go-kart or car, just out of exhilaration, just experience the rush? So just another one of those. I use this analogy with my patients often with an elastic band. So back to hormesis. What I might do with Michael is that cold immersion technique, right? So this is shocking. And whereas shock is not something he deals well with, to your point, getting into an accident, for example, or unexpected stressful situations in his life, what we want to do with hormesis is stress exposure, purposeful stress exposure, short, perfect dose stress exposure. You talked about exercise. That's something that's going to elevate his serotonin. But cold immersion, the more he does it and the more shocking he initially experiences it, the less shocking it becomes over time. His elastic band is more rubbery and stretchy. That's what we want to do through exposure and through cold immersion and hormesis is increase the elasticity of his resilience. I think they're one and the same. The other thing, by the way, and I always go to diet, nutrition, supplementation. If I were to stay in my lanes, that's my area of expertise. Just like they're dopamine precursors, they're serotonin precursors. So when it comes to foods, pumpkin seeds, oats, yogurt, spirulina, all very high in tryptophan. But then there's also supplements. I'm sure you'd agree. 5-hydroxytryptophan, B6 as a conversion enzyme there is quite often necessary, along with B12. Sometimes even magnesium, get the whole thing kind of going, but to upregulate, increase more serotonin to be able to manage stress better in this individual. We're definitely going to be giving him recommending some 5-HTP. Once again, always talk to your doctor, pharmacist, healthcare provider. This is not intended to be medical advice because when you're taking, so you already mentioned a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, that style of drug does not do well. It's in fact very contraindicated to be taking 5-HTP along with that. But here's the bottom line. When you know you're a certain 5-HT-TLPR genotype, you're probably like an S or an SS. It's not advisable that an SSRI is the best medication for you. There's probably better types of drugs. So okay, we want to be able to answer questions. So let's go into our last example, a theoretical individual, David. Okay, David's he's emotional. He's he's got a lot of spiritual stress. We call him the emotional empath. This is his executive function. So everything is really deep to the core he experiences. So David's got a decreased ADRA2B. So just like you, Justin, he's got the DD. That's empathic. You feel what a lot of other people feel. But he's also got low BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. We call these individual learners. Information doesn't come as quick or stay as quickly as the average individual. And he's also got this reduced serotonin production. So TPH in this case, not the 5-HT, the amount of serotonin, the TPH2, which is often it can contribute to, poor mood, maybe even melancholy. So his stress mechanism, he's predisposed to loneliness, cognitive decline, maybe even loss of purpose, if we were going to be extreme in the way this expresses with these 3 genes. What are your thoughts on what we might do with David?
Yeah, so there's a few moving parts, right? Because when you're low in BDNF as well, like you mentioned, you have difficulty with that neuroplasticity and that ability to kind of pick up new skills, new habits. But what we do find, and full disclosure, I'm also dysregulated here. So I pretty much am this guy in certain ways. What we find is that you tend to kind of be a subject matter expert as well. Like you really like dive deep with certain things. And I'm exactly that way. Like I could talk about genes all day. If I have to go fix my car right now, I better call my brother-in-law because I have no idea what to do about it. So, it's the combination of these things. You're a little bit less logical and a little bit more emotional. There's double-edged swords here. I'm a better coach because I'm an empath. You know what I mean?
Right.
But when it comes to the detriment, the downside, I would say we need to upregulate that BDNF via things like breath work, because that'll help with the noradrenaline pathway as well. Things like brain tap, if we want to use some devices here to increase neuroplasticity. I would make sure this individual is grounding regularly, or maybe using some PEMF, things to calm the nervous system a little bit. Take care of the adrenal glands with proper sodium ratios and hydration tactics. And I think that the gut matters here a lot too. So many things are made in the gut. And if that's unhealthy, which most people it is at this point, let's be honest, some high quality probiotics, a little bit of intermittent fasting. And beyond that, it's just exactly what we talked about. Lift weights, breathe, mindfulness, right? I would work on being logical versus empathetic all the time as well. And there's always mindset tactics that we can use in that circumstance.
Absolutely. I think social connections are absolutely key. You spoke a bit at the top about how women differ from men in some ways, that they deal with stress in a way that they solicit or lobby for togetherness with other like-minded females to figure it out. Guys don't. We internalize, and then we often, as consequence, become lonely. We just aren't connecting as often as we should be. There's a Dr. Robin Dunbar, professor of evolutionary psychology at Oxford University, who studies behavioral cognitive and neuroendocrinological mechanisms in humans. And recent research, actually, he published in the journal Adaptive Human Behavior and Physiology, suggests that we as guys need to connect at least a few times a week, and get this, for a couple of drinks at a local pub. That's what he talks about. He studied this exact situation because very minimal drinking. In fact, the literature is pretty clear nowadays. It's like very little to none. But nonetheless, it serves as a purpose to go local, to connect, open up, talk with guys, ilk, your like-minded social network. And let's talk like centenarians, people that live beyond 100 years old, that live in various pockets around the planet and live well, not just old age, live very healthy. they have this social connectivity. They have what they call, the Japanese call ikigai, right? Sense of purpose, which is often, it comes back to that family and local social connectivity. I guess I say all that to suggest that my recommendation for David would definitely be to create, if he doesn't already have it, a concrete social network, a couple of guys you can rely on for a drink once or twice a week at a local pub. I love what you said about PEMF, pulse electromagnetic frequency. I think there's those wearables. I was going to show and tell this. I think I'm going to avoid doing that this time and just speak to it real quick. TDCS, a little device that you can purchase, many of them online, but essentially this is transcranial direct current stimulation. So literally sending certain signals, a little different than PEMF, through the prefrontal cortex for guys like John to upregulate mood and sense of wellness. So I think there's that. And also TMS. We're hearing more about this. Transcranial magnetic stimulation is something I think that also might serve as boosting a little bit of that BDNF and feel good stuff going on in the brain. Speaking of BDNF, lastly, I'd also just say, and we talk about this in our reports as well, whole coffee fruit powder. So this is not the green coffee for weight loss. This is the mesocarp, or that external shell of the coffee fruit, extracted. 3 really great human clinical trials on upregulating BDNF. David is this emotional empath, is low in BDNF. And that's also a mood. It's not just neuromodulator or something that increases neuroconnectivity, but it's a mood regulator, entirely dependent on, by the way, vitamin D, as you know, and can be upregulated by sauna as well. Sauna is increased to heat and exercise. That's how I think I'd approach David. Perhaps your 2 cents, Justin, on how, if David was involved in a 3-way car crash with John and Michael, what's David's response?
He's not going to have the greatest of responses either. You know what I mean? It's like the one who has the warrior, that's the guy who's really going to kind of just brush it off. I would say the other 2 are both going to be like, man, I'm never taking that left again. There's going to be some level of, let's call it PTSD. We're not supposed to be, prescriptive in that way, diagnostic in that way, but it's going to haunt them for a little bit, right? These things are going to stick with them a little bit too long. So what I would say is you almost have to deal with it in the same way as you would deal with anything. You have to give yourself a little bit more exposure. I'll try taking that left again. You know what I mean? And just do it at some point. You have to put your feet on the ground. And like I said, I could give you a master plan, but you do have to master the plan as well. So I would actually encourage a little bit of exposure to the things that caused a bit of that anxiety in the first place. And, you got to let them go at some point.
I hear you loud and clear. Have you been in a car accident yourself, by the way? Appreciating you suggest you share some of these genes.
Not a car accident, but I demolished my father's 4-wheeler, which was a brand new ATV. When I was 17 years old, I crashed it down a mountain. I'm not sure if he's forgiven me yet, even, but it took me a little bit to
down a mountain. That's
yeah.
Okay. And you're allowed to tell the story. I'm glad you weren't in it. I suppose I'm assuming you were.
Well, I got tossed out of it. So yeah, it started flipping and rolling, and I got thrown about 30 feet, and I landed in the woods, and the thing was just crushed and demolished. And it took me a while to get over that one with my deletion.
You live through these situations, and you learn to, or you live to, be able to tell, and you learn about how your genes work. This is the story, folks. You are able to move forward in life and in a much more congruent, if you will, manner. Things are a lot easier. Stress is more water off the back. We talked a lot about the relationship between dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, all that relates to stress, the variations in our genes. We delved into pretty complex and fascinating aspects of neurology, biochemistry, but very specifically highlighting, the importance of personalized health approaches. We used examples, John, Michael, David. We're all different. There's no perfect combination. It's just, what do you have? And then how do you manage that genetic expression? Understanding your genetic unique makeup is really pivotal in tailoring, healthcare strategies that work best for you, especially when it comes to managing and preventing stress, which is probably North America's #1 silent killer. diabetes, heart disease, the big C, cancer. So encouraging Justin and I, both of us are separately together, encouraging all of you to consider DNA testing as a proactive step in your health journey. It's not just about uncovering potential risks. It's about empowering yourself with knowledge, preventing and managing stress better. And our call out is, if you haven't already had it done, get your DNA 360 kit. Closing thoughts from your side, Justin?
It's exactly what you said. Once you have your DNA, you can know how your brain interprets all these different stimulus. And then we can kind of steer you in the different directions that are going to make sense for that. Remember that genes represent a factory setting in the body, like a default setting. So once we know that, it's not to say that we can't encourage more optimal expression of the genes via the interventions that we choose. None of them are a curse. None of them are a blessing. It's all up to us to interpret them properly and get the best out of them. When it comes to stress in general, I always recommend you have to start to be aware of your internal narrative, right? Your dialogue. And I say dialogue instead of monologue because there's usually a conversation going on with two different parties inside of our brains. So, like I mentioned, we suffer far more in imagination than we do in reality. So I look at it like the old cartoons, how there's like a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other one. That which you feed grows, and that which you starve dies. So when you start to get those negative narratives in your mind, understand that it's up to you if you feed it or starve it, right? Feed the productive narrative. That's the one that's going to grow and gain power, and starve out that other one, because stress inside your mind is an energy leak. That's when you're going to be fatigued because you're giving power to the wrong narrative.
Love it. Man up. It's a series,
Man up.
folks. Tune in to future episodes. Justin and I are going to rap about the genomic predispositions with a focus on guys, because we just don't get enough of that. And there isn't enough of this information out there. And take this opportunity, please, to embrace the power of personalized medicine. Visit thednacompany.com. Get your own test done. Remember, this is your health journey, and it's as unique as your DNA. And my number one favorite setting as we sign off, your health is an investment and never an expense. Couldn't be more true as it pertains, especially to guys' health, where it typically takes us bleeding out of an orifice or a limb cut off before we seek health care or prevention. Thanks so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you guys next time.